Welcome from San Diego, California. We are reaching you in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, live and in multimedia formats through a unique and complex international telecommunications network via satellite, microwave, and cable. The International Training Center at San Diego State University brings us all together once again through this original video conference program, which joins distinguished organizations representing education, business, and government in Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, and Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina, Spain, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the participation of the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C., and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, Switzerland. My name is Dan Hopwood, and I will be your moderator for today's video conference. I'm a Vice President with Marsh Risk Consulting, a unit of Marsh, an international insurance and management consulting firm, which specializes in insurance brokering, risk management, in the area that I concentrate in, business continuity planning. We would like to thank all the coordinators and associates of this multinational learning network for their invaluable efforts to make this program a constructive discussion forum for innovative ideas and collaborative strategies that can benefit our organizations, our communities, and our society in general, while raising our individual competencies and productivity. With this video conference, we will begin our year 2000 theme of Global Strategies for Excellence, Value, and Optimal Performance. The new realities of information technology on a global scale, rising socioeconomic expectations, and increased competition in the new millennium will make it imperative for individuals, organizations, communities, and nations to pursue and achieve new levels of performance through value-oriented knowledge. This will only be achieved by those capable of incorporating innovative systems that emphasize the strategic integration or optimization of their key resources and competencies. An essential ingredient in this process will be the adoption of a new mentality for collaborative and telecommunications-based distance learning to accelerate knowledge transfer. This exciting series of international video conferences will present participants with information to increase their productivity and value, a process that must be accelerated as global competition becomes the major driving force for increased efficiency and productivity at all levels. Our presenters today will provide their insights on workplace trends and dynamics and what will be necessary in both the near and long term to successfully anticipate and manage the changing realities of work. Today's video conference is composed of 2 presentation modules and 2 question and answer sessions, and we look forward to your live participation. We have 2 very distinguished presenters with us today, and you'll be hearing from them about the importance of organizational structures and about organizational change. In fact, we should seek to stimulate change in order to promote productive successes. The ability to respond to change and to achieve success comes at both personal and organizational levels. On a personal level, organizational change is reflected in the decreased job tenure for men and women under the age of 35. In the U.S., for example, the average 32-year-old has already worked for 9 different employers. While the U.S. economy creates more than 100,000 new jobs per month, an average of 300,000 people file first-time claims for unemployment each week. Laws and regulations designed to protect either U.S. workers or employers from inequities in their social contract have proved impractical in this economy. In Europe, where it is generally more difficult to hire and fire workers, the unemployment rate is now at 10%, more than twice that in the U.S., which stands at 4%, the lowest in the last 30 years. Governments must therefore dismantle obsolete labor regulations and try to adapt the growing need for more flexible solutions. Given these workplace trends, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Charles Brass and Dr. William Bridges, both recognized authorities in this field. Charles Brass is the chairman of the Australian-based Future of Work Foundation. Mr. Brass has had a number of careers in his adult life. He began his working life by building a successful wedding photography business, moved into teaching at a secondary school, and then enjoyed 15 years in corporate human resources, the last 8 as director of a German-based multinational. He has been involved full-time with the Future of Work Foundation since 1995. The mission of the Future of Work Foundation is to engage all Australians in creating a better future for work, a challenge Mr. Brass has embraced for the past 4 years. He has spoken to audiences across the world and enjoys working with people who, like him, are struggling to put the profound changes which have taken place in the world of work into some perspective for themselves. Mr. Brass holds an honors science degree, a degree in education, and has an MBA. William Bridges, president of the William Bridges and Associates, a business consulting firm. Dr. Bridges speaks, writes, and conducts training programs on how organizations and individuals can deal with change successfully. He has written 10 books, including Transitions, Managing Transition, Job Shift, and Creating You and Company in 1997. Dr. Bridges has been a keynote speaker at many conferences and has been cited by the Wall Street Journal as one of the top 10 independent executive development presenters in the country. Dr. Bridges' clients have included such organizations as AT&T, Intel, Hewlett-Packard, Procter & Gamble, and the U.S. Veterans Administration. Educated originally in humanities, Dr. Bridges holds degrees from Harvard, Columbia, and Brown universities. He was a professor of American literature before changing careers at the age of 40. Welcome, gentlemen, and let's begin with a question, if we may. According to a recent article in a well-known Economist magazine entitled The Future of Work, employees at all levels must now take the initiative to educate and re-educate themselves, to build their own personal brand and to know their own story, and be prepared to network. Questions are these. Are the traditional professions and the single-focused technical career disappearing in the global labor market? Will the future reality to employers and employees be one of both greater opportunity and increased uncertainty? And lastly, is all this driven by the forces of globalization and technology, or by changing human values? I'd like to take the first 2 of those series of questions and shift them over to Bill Bridges. And Bill, if you'd be kind enough to address them.
I think that the single-focus careers are in fact changing. That isn't because some change has happened that has created new career focuses. It is simply that the career world is being redefined by actual employers with actual needs. And so today's worker is much less likely to have a field to work in day after year, then that employee is likely to have an actual employer with an actual problem that he is trying to solve.
Charles, are the things that Bill talked about driven by changing values or technology?
I think the answer is they're driven by both of those. Certainly globalisation and technology has a significant impact on the sorts of things that organisations are now attempting to do. But I also think many of the things that need doing in this world are done at a local level, and so these changes have as much to do with bringing the human back to the context as they do with the global world.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you both for those insights. And Charles will now discuss how to organize to get things done, using historical analogies of a variety of organizational structures. We will learn the value of the structure as a whole, the need for teamwork, and how organizations can be a bridge for future success, both personally and organizationally. I'm certain you will find Charles's comments to be intriguing, as well as challenging. So let's begin with Module 1.
When I was here last 12 months ago, we spoke about the nature of work and what it might mean to think about and do work differently in the future. This time, I'm very pleased to share the program with Bill Bridges, author of Job Shift, one of the seminal books in that area. But this time, however, our theme is trends in workplace dynamics and how we organise ourselves to get things done. Bill will look in some detail a little later at the changes that are taking place inside modern organisations, and my role is to talk a little about the broader societal context within which corporations and other institutions operate. Now, everyone watching this program is interested in getting something done, and most of us are part of complex organisations that combine the efforts of many people in order to meet their particular goals. Despite the different goals that our organisations almost certainly have, chances are that they're actually structured in rather similar ways. Chances are, for example, that our organisations have a hierarchical structure, with those nearer the top having more power, making bigger decisions and earning more money. Chances are that we work for an entity that is owned by somebody else, probably by many people, and almost certainly by people we've never met. Chances are that even if our organisation didn't start out as a joint stock company, it probably is one today, or is likely to become one in the foreseeable future. Chances are also good that we've been caught up in at least one round of downsizing or other enforced organisational restructuring during the past 12 months. This similarity in organisational experience should surprise us. If we had been able to get together 100 years ago, our experience in the organisations we worked for would have been much more diverse. Until the last 4 decades of the 20th century, education, government and business structures differed significantly. It is only as the pursuit of economic objectives has become supremely dominant that organisational structures and experiences have started to converge. One of the consequences of increasing globalisation in recent years has been a narrowing of the criteria that societies have used to define their success. Clearly, GDP growth and economic efficiency have been the dominant success criteria of the last half of the 20th century. And it is a measure of the success of these particular criteria that organisations that once would not have considered themselves as economic entities, such as universities, community groups and government departments, have now begun to be structured in business-like ways and have become subject to the same success criteria. In my remarks today, I'd like to challenge the assumption that these same success criteria are relevant to this century. I will also propose some alternative approaches that it seems to me will make it more likely that we will get done what needs to be done in sustainable and human-centred ways in the future. To begin, I'd like to demonstrate that there are many alternative viable organisational structures. I'd like to briefly examine 3 case studies which have been chosen to challenge some of the commonly held assumptions about how we organise ourselves to get done what needs doing. The first case study is the world's largest residential real estate development business. This business provides accommodation for millions of individuals without recourse to any organisational hierarchy. Here are the shareholders in this business. Termites. Termite mounds can be up to 6 metres in height and be home to millions of termites. The mounds are made from soil cemented by saliva and baked in the sun. Because of their ingenious construction, the temperature inside a mound can be up to 10 degrees cooler than outside. Each mound is individually made to suit its residents, yet there are no architects, supervising builders or engineers. Somehow each termite plays the necessary role to ensure the creation of this phenomenal feat of ecological engineering without needing any supervision or management. In fact, the role of the individual termite is so simple that it can be modelled on a computer using just 3 rules. This simulation comes from MIT and demonstrates how computer-generated termites can construct these huge mounds from the 3 basic rules. My second case study is the most prolific, productive and profitable small business on the planet today. This business produces, amongst other things, the largest known and most efficient and complex computer, uses 100% biodegradable and recyclable components. This business has operated in its current form for thousands of years, yet it meets current international standards for the efficiency of its service delivery and the user-friendliness of its operations. It's the largest employer of people in the world and happily operates at high efficiency for 365 days a year. Well, 366 this year, although its operating cycles do respond to diurnal and seasonal patterns. The business is, of course, the human body. And all this is achieved without a leader or boss in the corporate sense of the word. As well as demonstrating alternative organisation structures, I've chosen these 2 examples to remind us that human beings do not have a monopoly on organisational design. Even though human inventions dominate our lives today, we must never lose sight of the fact that Mother Nature has been creating organisational forms for billions of years, and she has been doing so with an efficiency and effectiveness that human beings still struggle to match. We still have a few things to learn from nature about how to make our designs fit their intended use. My final case study is an example of a human creation, albeit an unconventional one. This is the largest and fastest growing single business in the world today. It is the largest source of information on the planet and yet is owned by nobody. It is, of course, the Internet, which began as a system designed to let academics communicate more quickly with each other and is now the most pervasive information source in the world. While huge amounts of money are made and lost on it each day, no one owns it or controls it, neither is it being designed in any conventional sense of that word. In my remarks today, I will explore what we can learn from both human and natural history to help those of us in business and education to get things done better in the future. I will begin with a brief but perhaps unconventional look at the history of human organisation. Then, with my 3 case studies in mind, I'll conclude with some thoughts about how we might get things done better in the 21st century. The earliest form of human organisation was the tribe, a small group of genetically related individuals who banded together to protect their mutual survival. Tribes have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, much longer than any other form of human organisation. They have proved to be extremely effective for 2 main reasons. Firstly, because the role which each individual played in the tribe evolved to take advantage of their particular abilities, and secondly, because tribes were small enough for each person to fully appreciate their individual role in ensuring collective survival. About 9,000 years ago, humans began creating permanent settlements, an innovation for which tribal organisation was totally unsuited. Not only did the first cities bring together many more people than were in a single tribe, but they also required people to collaborate in completely new ways. The walls of Jericho, the earliest known city, for example, were 30 feet wide and at least 20 feet high. Inside this earliest city lived 2,000 or 3,000 people who included artisans, architects, warriors and administrators. Tribal structures were simply incapable of building such infrastructure, and even 3,000 people are too many to be bound together through simple kinship. These earliest cities developed significant social hierarchies, including both cultural and legal rules and regulations, in order to keep themselves together. The physical structure of early cities, as well as their internal organisation, differed widely across the world. Some, like early Roman cities, were built to a strict formula in an attempt to create physical and social infrastructures that were deliberately identical. Others, like early Chinese cities, grew and developed idiosyncratically according to the whims of the ruling elite. These organisational forms evolved to meet novel needs. Human beings at this time were engaged in activities on a scale they'd never previously attempted, and they experimented with a wide variety of structures in their various efforts. Gradually, successful structures emerged, which were transplanted whenever new similar endeavours were undertaken. Entire empires and dynasties were created in this way, when those who could most successfully organise to get done what needed to be done succeeded above those who were not as well organised. But entire empires, such as the Roman Empire, were also destroyed when they became too rigid and inflexible in their organisation to respond to new circumstances. Whole books have been written on the rise and fall of civilizations, but in the context of this presentation, I want to focus on the way in which trade and commerce has been organised through human history. For many years, it was thought that developments in agriculture and farming were the factors that sparked the development of cities. In recent years, however, it has been recognised that many early cities were in fact located near sources of rare and valuable commodities such as salt, flint or obsidian rock, which were harvested by the city dwellers and traded, sometimes over vast distances and often for food and other basic necessities. It is now clear that crop growing and animal domestication emerged only some time after the original settlement. Much of this early trade was a communal affair, with all of the residents of the city sharing what was received. Very quickly, however, individual trade developed as specialist goods were created and sold. There's clear evidence of hierarchical societies in all the early cities, as some residents rapidly became more affluent than others. Cities quickly became larger and more complex. Cities with more than 40,000 people are known to have existed more than 5,000 years ago. And the scale of ventures undertaken within those cities has increased exponentially. Where goods were once bartered or exchanged directly for each other, the increased complexity of trade inspired the creation of various kinds of money. These currencies vastly increased the efficiency of trade and commerce by making it possible for both buyers and sellers to receive tradable commodities. Quite quickly, it became impossible for individuals, even kings and emperors, to fund, let alone control, all the projects needed to develop, sustain and grow a city or a country. So various creative means were found to secure the required funds, most of which involved the pooling of individual resources. For example, the first joint stock company appeared in the 14th century when a group of French grain growers collaborated to jointly construct a flour mill, which no one could afford on their own. The Industrial Revolution changed the dynamics of organisations significantly. Technology, for example, made knowledge available to a much wider audience, changing forever the role of the master or tutor. Technology also permitted many new forms of warfare and permitted a degree of experimentation in military organisation that had not previously been seen. Rapid technological development led to huge demands for venture capital, and in an attempt to quarantine investors' risks, the limited liability company was reinvented on a much larger scale. By the beginning of the 20th century, human ingenuity had created many varied organisational forms through which we got done what needed doing. In professional associations, the partnership provided a way of recognising ownership while at the same time rewarding participation. In education, governments retained control and ownership of institutions of early learning and auspiced the creation of independent, enduring tertiary institutions. Government departments evolved unique structures designed to contend with political vagaries. And community enterprises grew and organised themselves in all sorts of creative ways as people struggled to make them viable. In business, however, one structure has dominated: the enduring legal identity of the corporation has been steadily strengthened over the past 200 years, until now, at the beginning of the 21st century, we find that the limited liability company is the most prolific and powerful organisational structure on the planet. Interestingly, the first corporations were not designed to be enduring and were created only for specific purposes and most often with deliberately limited lifespans, often only 20 years. But the speed with which professional associations, educational institutions, government departments, even military structures are being corporatised right across the planet is testimony to the extent to which the corporate structure has been seen as successful. Some of the reasons why corporate structures are seen as so successful are obvious. Corporate structures allow financial risks to be spread, from the 14th century flour millers to Amazon.com in the 20th century the joint stock corporation has minimised the exposure of each investor to the risks of the project being undertaken. Corporations are capable of undertaking huge projects and of operating across the world. In this century and the last, capital has become more mobile as the world has become more global. This has facilitated a growth in the size of corporations. As an example, there are now more than 70 multinational corporations with an income greater than the GDP of Cuba. The corporate structure has allowed organisations to confidently embark on multi-billion-dollar projects. It also allows individuals with relatively meagre resources to share in ownership. Where once corporations were only owned by the rich, the number of citizens with shareholdings is increasing every year. In fact, the number of corporate shareholders is increasing much faster than the number of corporate employees. When I was last here, I used this image to demonstrate how much money governments were prepared to invest in order to attract corporations to their neighbourhoods or their countries. Corporations very visibly create great wealth, not just for their owners, but for society in general. Although corporations are structured and operate in many different ways, and this will provide fertile ground for what Bill Bridges will have to say in a few minutes, they are all embedded in common structural features that we often take for granted. First, ownership has been separated from management. Corporate structures provide a convenient way for those with surplus capital to invest in projects without also requiring them to become directly involved in the project itself. It is the managers who are responsible for running the business, and it's seen as management's obligation to act in the interests of their organisation's shareholders. This is now legally enshrined in legislation in virtually every country. As corporations have become larger, a second separation has occurred. That is, between managers and workers, with workers being those people inside the corporation engaged to perform a particular task, but with a much diminished accountability for the performance of the company. There are also some less discussed and more subtle issues here. Since the company has a separate legal identity, it is possible to talk about the objectives of the corporation and to distinguish these from the objectives of any one person or group of people inside the corporation. In fact, it is possible, if not mandatory, that those inside the corporation strive to achieve these corporate objectives, even if they seriously conflict with their own goals. It is the pursuit of these corporate objectives which has justified the downsizing and re-engineering policies and practices which have been the subject of much criticism in recent years. So corporations then have acquired a special place in our world. They stand apart from the people who are inside them, act entirely in the pursuit of their own best interests, and both consume and generate huge quantities of money and wealth. The 20th century will be remembered as the century dominated by economics. The prime objectives pursued in the last century were economic growth and international competitiveness, and the assumption was that all other issues would be solved if we achieved these two. For much of the world and for most of the century, it seemed that this assumption was valid. Certainly, human beings live longer and are healthier, and on average have accumulated more wealth at the end of the century than at its beginning. But it's interesting to explore which of the components of current corporate and economic life apply to the three case studies with which I began this presentation. The businesses in at least two of the case studies do not appear to have simple, clear-cut goals that they are following. What is the objective of the human body? What is the goal of the internet? What is clear from all three examples, however, is that the various components of the business must interact in a highly cooperative way in order for the business to remain viable. Competition between the organs of the body or between termites in the mound is counterproductive to the success of the enterprise. Notwithstanding the high degree of cooperation between the various components of the business, all three examples also reveal the crucial role played by each individual constituent and emphasise how important it is that all contributors understand and deliver what is expected of them. The body could not function if the kidneys did not remove waste. The internet would cease to exist without people creating their own web pages and posting them. The prominent focus which economic objectives have attained in recent years has not been without its critics. One of the most compelling critiques has been written by the French author Viviane Forester and has been translated into English as The Economic Horror. For those interested in pursuing these matters in more detail, I'd also recommend two other books: Tyranny of the Bottom Line, Why Corporations Make Good People Do Bad Things by Ralph Estes, or The Post-Corporate World, Life After Capitalism by David C. Corton. As a futurist, my interest in these matters is to consider what alternatives might exist, and most importantly, how they might be implemented. Clearly, the economic miracle of the 20th century is very real. The world's people are, on average, healthier and wealthier at the end of the 20th century than they were at the beginning. However, it is just as clear that many problems have been created, or at least exacerbated, by the focus on economic success criteria. Many people from many different parts of the world have proposed alternatives. Some attempt to redesign economic measures such as the GDP to include social and ecological indicators. Others work with corporations to become more family and environment friendly. Still others examine how technological innovations might provide an opportunity for the greater involvement of citizens whenever crucial decisions are being made. My friend and mentor, Robert Theobald, who died just 2 months ago, suggested that success in the 21st century would require radically different criteria from those which provided success in the 20th century. His three success criteria for the future are effective decision-making, ecological integrity, and social cohesion. And these seem to me to encompass the issues that we need to face. As I explored these issues, I was overwhelmed by the range of alternatives that deep-thinking people had proposed. I was also struck by how difficult it can be for ordinary people to connect with some of these ideas and to see how they might contribute to changing the way that their organisations function. I have, however, come across a conceptual model which I find easy to grasp and which has helped me judge the proposals and ideas which confront me. This model was originally conceived by scientist Arthur Koestler in a groundbreaking book called The Ghost in the Machine in 1969. However, it has been significantly developed by a remarkable American called Ken Wilber and is most powerfully explored in a 1987 book he wrote called A Brief History of Everything. Ken Wilber is a Buddhist and spiritualist and has a remarkably fresh and clear way of explaining complex issues. And this model is an attempt to explore how things are organised. It provides a framework for the structure of organisations as well as of thoughts and ideas. The basis of the model is an entity called a holon. A holon is a unit of organisation and it has two fundamental properties. A holon is an independent unit in its own right and it is simultaneously part of a larger unit. A simple example will help to explain. An atom is a holon. It is a unit in its own right, though of course it's made up of smaller entities, which are also holons, as we shall see. But an atom is also part of larger units called molecules. An atom can be examined in its own right and its properties explored. These properties are very predictable and stable. An atom can also be examined as part of a molecule. Although it retains its original properties, these can be modified when it combines with other atoms. The molecule can also be examined as an identity and its properties determined. These properties will incorporate the properties of the atoms in certain ways, but will also be unique to the molecule. The significance of this model is the recognition that nature organises everything holonically. Everything in nature is a holon. The human body, for example, builds on atoms and molecules to create organs and systems and ultimately a complete and distinct living entity. So it is with many things humans have created. Words, for example, are entities in their own right with their own meanings. Yet they are made up of letters that are also units in their own right. And words are also part of larger entities such as speeches and books. However, many human creations do not resemble holons. In particular, while many of our organisational and societal structures appear to exist as entities in their own right, they do not necessarily link holonically with other structures. Corporations are in fact most often deliberately set up to stand apart, not only from those who work inside them, but also from other corporations with whom they compete fiercely. The people who make up corporations seem similarly expected to bring only a part of themselves to work and to leave a part of themselves at home. At a societal level, too many of us feel isolated and alone, expected to fend for ourselves and finding it hard to see where we fit into a bigger picture. Why is it that we seem to be capable of operating holonically in some situations but not in others? Perhaps there is a historical lesson here. The truly holonic human structures, such as language and kinship structures, have been with us for millennia. We have refined and shaped our use and understanding of language, for example, over perhaps 50,000 years. Our corporate structures and work organisations, on the other hand, have a perhaps 200-year history. As well, language is ubiquitous, shared by us all, whereas participation in work and employment has been restricted to a select few for only a part of their lives. The most effective organisations, including termite mounds, human bodies and enlightened corporations, provide an opportunity for all to find a useful and meaningful place, to meet a real need, and to see how what they do fits with others. The human race once knew how to create such organisations for most, if not all, of its members. I hope as we enter a new millennium that we haven't forgotten.